Have you heard about this personal and professional podcast?
Coaching in Session
with your host, Michael Rearden.
One of the things I love to do is to get a brief description of, why you got into this work, who you are, kind of tell the audience basically a bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I've been a coach professionally for a couple of decades as part of my career as an HR executive. Most of the coaching was on career development and moving through different layers of leadership and leadership coaching. I really started to transition probably 10 years ago into life coaching because so much of leadership, if you will, really ties to who we are as people and values alignment. And as I got more and more into that, I recognized there are moments in our careers when we really benefit from coaching. There are moments in our broader lives, and those are during transitions when coaching is particularly powerful. And the research on transition shows, we're going through life transitions every about 18 months, some kind, right? It can be about moving. It can be a relationship change. It can be something to do with careers, family. So there's a lot of different kinds of transitions we go through in our life. And I really recognized that I felt very purpose driven in that kind of coaching, as well as the executive coaching. And so as I was combining those types of coaching, I also stumbled upon art journaling as an additional tool. So all these things sort of led me, if you will, to my current career.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of life coaching as if you were a builder. So when you hire a builder to build a home, you expect for him to do the plumbing or hire people to do the plumbing, electrical, roofing, etc. Right? So even though the home builder essentially could just say, hey, I built a house, you got your 4 walls, you got your roof, you got your foundation, you should be happy, right? But there's so much more to building a home. And I believe life coaching is essentially that, because there's just so many facets to what life is. It's not just your health. It's not just your career. It's not just your relationships. It's the totality of who you are, who you can become. And one of the first questions I want to ask is the foundation aspect to helping a person build the life that they would like to have, the life that's going to give them joy, happiness, fulfillment, all of those things. I think if we can begin at the foundation, we can really, truly start to begin something more profound.
So I love your analogy, and I agree with you. The most meaningful coaching engagement really does start with, if you will, North Star or values clarification. Rather, it's an exercise around what is your North Star? What is your legacy? There's a lot of different ways to get at that. But the clearer someone is about who they are, who they want to be, and us really understanding, are those two things aligned or not? And what do those gaps look like? Then you can start to really set some intentions and goals and use that work as a compass to help you guide your decisions, your behaviors. What sort of habits do we want to form to support who you want to be and the legacy you want to leave? In many cases, people really struggle with that foundational exercise, and their first answers are like, what do you want? And it's an interesting story. Clients say, I want to buy a boat. Well, that's a tactical thing. You can earn money and save money and buy a boat. But as you get under the why, what did that boat symbolize? That's where the richness comes, because for this particular client, the boat symbolized legacy, because he had really great memories of being out on a boat with his grandfather. And he wanted to do that with his children and grandchildren, right? So it was about making meaningful moments through like generations that had to do with fishing and being on the water, not so much, I need to make enough money to buy a boat, right? So what sounded at first, 'cause it was one of the first things he thought of when you really dug under it, because not everyone knows initially. It's a lot of work to figure out your values, and then what do those values actually look like? Because you may say leaving a legacy and it looks like one thing to you, and to me it could look entirely different. So I think that's some of the really rich foundation work coaches can do.
Yeah, it's very similar to success, because success for me might be different to you, next person down the road. But what I have found when it comes to people and wanting to start off good, we can think of New Year's resolutions, we can just think of a good life, creating their legacy, get clear on our goals and what we would like to do, is that many people self-sabotage themselves. And I like to think of, like, using the same analogy as the builder, like today's a building show, I guess. It's not recommended to pour foundation in the rain. So most people, that self-sabotage essentially is the rain. It's like you're pouring the foundation in all the wrong spots and all the wrong times. And it's not so much to say that there is a right time for someone to take action, because I know there's people who wait their whole life to be happy. 65 is when I'm going to retire and I'm going to travel the world and I'm going to be happy. But yet it's something that we can appreciate in the moment. We can appreciate that today. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, like, people struggle with the idea of time, where they think they have an abundance of it, but time is not a renewable resource. How and why, or not so much why, how can people start to use their time in more of a beneficial way for them?
I couldn't agree with you more. Time is a precious resource. And the older we get, the less time we have. And so it becomes more and more precious. Anyone raising a family who knows how fast you're going and think they have all this time. I was just talking to a client who's got children at home who are now early tweens. And she was truly just saying, this is 10 minutes ago, I don't know what happened. The last 2 years have flown by. They're going to be out of the house, before I know it. And they're pulling away. And I think we don't realize time until we look back. And I think that's what's scary. What I like to work with people on, because you brought up the self-sabotage in time, I think there's real power in, as you set goals, in figuring out the smallest possible step you can take, right? I mean, we grossly overestimate what we can accomplish in a year. It's a famous quote, but really underestimate what we can do maybe in a month. And I work with people to say, because we all are resistant to change. In many cases, it is more comfortable because it's familiar not to change than to change, because you've got these ingrained patterns. And so you're having to really work and rewire your brain in many cases to put in new habits and behaviors to get different results than you've been getting. And I have found working through the smallest possible step, but taking that step daily, rather it's one email sent toward a new career, 5 minutes researching a new job. Because many people will say, I need to get a new job. We'll just play this out with jobs. And they'll feel like in one day they have to go out and network and do their resume and do 25 applications. And that very quickly gets overwhelming and then very discouraging. Whereas broken down into really, really small steps, I think helps with the self-sabotage, because a really small step people can do. And I try and build in a lot of positive self-affirmation and self-talk, right? We have that driving critic telling us subconsciously, meaning we're hearing it, but we're not even aware how negatively we're talking to ourselves most of the time. I like to try and create some exercises where we become aware of that. And one of the best ways to counteract it, particularly if you're doing the teeny small step each day, which goes to self-sabotage, is congratulating yourself for that small step. I still do something, and I feel silly doing it, but I actually do it out loud. I finish at the gym. I never want to go to the gym when I go. and I really never want to lift weights and I need to lift weights. I'll like trot on a treadmill all day long, right? It's like, okay. But like the lifting of the weights, I hate. But I get in the car after I do it. So the whole way there, I'm thinking I'm just going to turn the corner or I'm going to go to fast food. I'm going to do anything but actually get myself there. So I get there, I go in. When I leave, I'll be walking to my car out loud. I am using my words alone. So I am truly talking to myself. I have started to say, great job. I am proud of you. I say it out loud and I feel it. And it really does help me. I still don't like lifting weights any more than I have ever, but that self-talk also just out loud in the parking lot in my car, don't care what anyone thinks, is helping to reinforce that. So I try and have clients, when you get in the self-sabotage, smallest step and then congratulating myself, even if it's I sent one email, I did one walk around the block, like I got outside and got fresh air. However small it is can make a really, really big difference because it's building muscle. I mean, to use the muscle analogy or the fitness analogy, that is how we build that self-discipline and put new habits in place.
Very true. What I think people do is like they give themselves this good start. So it could be diet, for example. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but they eat a salad. And they say, well, I had a salad, so I'm healthy or I'm being healthy. And I'm thinking in my mind, having a healthy diet is not so much of eating a salad and then going and having a dinner of hamburgers and hot dogs or French fries every night. And just because you had a salad on Monday morning, it's not going to counteract the negative. So the question basically I want to ask is, can a person counteract the negatives, similar to how they say you can't outwork a bad diet? Because if you have a very bad diet and you eat all these junk food, even if you don't go to the gym to lift weights, but you go on the treadmill, you go Stairmaster, things like that, they say it's going to be so much more difficult because it's almost like you're working backwards.
Yeah, so that isn't my area of expertise, but no, I mean, there's a point for sure that the mitigating those other food choices, right? And you need to get yourself, if we just keep using that with, it can't be every day. There could be one day a week where I get this. So it doesn't have to be 6 straight days of salad, but you need to make that incrementally, say 6 days of healthier choices. When I find people struggling with the two extremes that you've almost said, that puts them in a teeter-totter and it puts them in a state of deprivation versus finding the smallest things you can do and do for a day, right? Maybe it's stop eating at 6. Maybe it's instead of chips for a snack every day, you need a pick-me-up at 3:00. And that is typically whatever, chips and a soda. Instead, it becomes, apple with peanut butter and sparkling water. You make that one change, but you don't let the others go awry, right? You don't do the counterbalancing because I've done one good thing, I'm going to do it the other. But I think that's like that one small change. I think people, once again, nutrition is not my area of expertise, but it's the same sort of thing. We try and do either too many changes or we swing too wildly and give up. And I think humans in general do better with a very gradual set of changes and a lot of rewards. How did I feel at the end of the day on a day where I just didn't eat chips? I didn't starve myself. I, had other things, and starting to be really aware of how you felt. Did you feel deprived or did you feel in control and healthy? And working with that. So I'm a huge believer in a lot of self-talk and self-awareness and finding out the times of day, in this case, that are most dangerous for you, right? Most people start the day with a lot of willpower and end with none, right? It's why if you really, in many cases, need to do something, work out, do key things, do it in the morning where you've got that, and then reward yourself, not with treats in the case of diet, but with positive self-talk. Or something that you enjoy, talking to a friend, watching a movie, whatever.
Yeah, of course. And, diet is, just one of the examples because it could be also sending an email. So you send an email maybe on Monday and the next week you're like, well, I sent an email last week, so you don't do it again. Or, it could be any little thing where I think you brought in some great clarifications though, where it's like you can do this every single day. We could send an email a day. We can do the small step a day. So it's not like, okay, I did it once and I'm done with it. Because I know many people, they have this mindset of, I did it on Tuesday. Yeah, I gotta do it again on Wednesday. Oh, Jesus. So now it becomes like almost debilitating. And then I think it would just go back to the step is not small enough yet. So we can make it even more palatable. And then so it's like, what is something that you can do every single day that, that is not, going to put you off or put you out. And if we think of like hitting the snooze, or we think about going on our phone or watching TV, people do it every single day. It doesn't put them out. But if you just took, let's say 5 minutes from, doing that activity that's not bringing you any benefit, and you just gave yourself something that would, maybe journaling, for example, right? So you say, I'm going to spend 5 minutes in the evening planning for my tomorrow. So when you wake up in the morning, you have, full throttle and you're ready to go. Versus, okay, I'm going to spend my last 5 minutes of me before bed being on my smartphone. So it could just be that small change that really drives change for their tomorrow rather than focusing on what they're taking away from their today.
Absolutely. And I liked what you said, that the task for a person who's struggling with this just may not be small enough. Yeah, I have a hypothesis as it relates to, to people who want to try journaling or art journaling, like 10 minutes a day. When I started that particular practice, I started it because it gave me joy, right? I also recommend people keep a little notebook. And whenever they do something inadvertently that they enjoy, like make a note of what it is. And you can sometimes use those as rewards. But what I found when I first started just playing with art, it was playing with it for process, not an output. Not an artist, wasn't trying to create art, was just playing. I would do it. I'd make coffee in the morning. Well, I'd be making breakfast. I like old school sort of oatmeal. So you've got water boiling versus, quite honestly, picking up my phone, which is what you do. It takes, I don't know, a few minutes for water to boil. I had crayons there and I'd start to doodle, and you'd feel, right? That's what you start to notice. Pay attention. You doodle for 3 minutes versus like watching the water. Mm-hmm. Or, snacking out of the fridge or scrolling through my phone and then forgetting the water's even boiling because I went down some rabbit hole on social media and then there's no water. I've got to put more water, right? I mean, all the things that we just as humans do, that was such an interesting way to start building a habit that I was enjoying, that ended up being a creative outlet. And it's why I am a fan of finding things that are 5 or 10 minutes that you can, where possible. I'm not always a big fan of multitasking because I feel like that means you don't do either thing well. But if you would be picking up your smartphone while you're doing it, consider doing something else more constructive during that time. To go back to the fitness analogy, for some stretch for 5 minutes, do 5 minutes of squats. I mean, right? Just to even say, do something that's not numbing. And I'm not, anti-smartphone, but I think there's been so much research that if you're not using it really intentionally, it becomes a numbing device. And in general, depending on what's on your feeds, doesn't make people feel great about their lives. Now, I'm a big fan of people really curating what they see and finding things that give them joy, right? Versus finding things that have them enraged or worked up or feeling less than. That's another whole story, but that's a very powerful habit to switch if a person is working on in their life how they feel. If a person comes to me and says, I just feel, anxious and unhappy and comparison all the time, one of the first things I will ask them, and we'll even do it together, is to look at their feeds and see what's there. Like, what do they just even, is they're mindlessly scrolling, what is coming in versus really, say, curating things that might make them feel better.
I don't know if you've been ever asked this question. It's a very weird question, but are transitions the same? So, for example, a teen becoming an adult and an adult becoming, a person who's retired, etc. Are those transitions the same?
They're not the same, but they have the same components. So every transition, so it's a great question. Every transition has the same components, because if you think of it, there's an end of something. Something is ending. A job, a relationship, you're graduating. So it can be a happy ending, right? Maybe you're getting married. Your single days are ending, right? So there's an ending, even though they say getting married sounds like it's all beginning. There's an ending. So every transition is an ending. Then it has a middle where you are not used to what the new is going to be, right? There is an adjustment period, messy middle. And then it has a period of like new beginnings where you're figuring it out. So, if we play it with just a job change, you're either saying goodbye to another job and you have to process that. You may be thrilled, you may be sad, but there's a whole process in ending that goes on. Then there's, like I said, the middle, which is it's not a straight line. We desperately want things to be all great and all straight. And most of the time, there's a tremendous amount of ambiguity. I'm always surprised when I physically moved. Early in my career, when I was in broadcast journalism, I moved quite a bit. It's how you advanced. You moved through different markets and be so excited. And I'd get to this new town and I think I like change. And I would end up being really disoriented, right? I'd have a new apartment, but like the grocery store's different and you can't find the stuff and parking's different, right? It's these really subtle little things that I didn't really miss from the previous town because I'll figure out the produce aisle or the ice cream aisle in the store. But because it's new and it's not familiar, it's disorienting. It would always surprise me because I would tell myself the struggle, no, this is great. I'm going for a new job. It's in a bigger market, blah, 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 all good. And yet it was still disorienting because things weren't familiar and everything was just a little bit harder. When we have our routines dialed in, we don't think too much about how to get to our favorite store or our go-to restaurant or, right? You found those places. So I think of that a lot when I think of a transition in a neutral sense, because, that's kind of a neutral thing I'm talking about. And yet it would have some sadness that I'd miss knowing where I was going. I have to figure it out. You don't figure it out the first time. Think of the last time you moved and as you were moving, you would see something like, we're going to go there all the time. I'm going to be there. And then you truly never go there for some reason. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, I remember when I moved from Connecticut to Texas, and it's a very different place to be because Connecticut, you have your 4 seasons, you got your fall, your winter, snow, all of that coming down. Texas is like it didn't rain for 90 days my first summer. I was like, Jesus, and then when it does rain, people don't know how to drive, and I'm like, okay, well, you get used to it. I remember the first probably year of me living here, I was like, I have to GPS every place. And then it was so funny when I tried to not use the GPS, I felt like so confident, so brave. And then I got lost. I was like, man, let me just kind of stick with the GPS for a little bit. And I just thought about this probably the other day where I was like, man, I'm not even using my GPS anymore. It took some time to acclimate, to get used to things. But the thing is, the change from my old routine to the new routine, it felt nice, but it was almost daunting in a sense because there was so much things that I had to know. I had to figure out where the grocery store was. I had to figure out where the gym was. I had to, figure out different highways to avoid during rush hours. So there was things that it almost felt like a setback because I had to relearn things, but it also brought a new joy about living. It was more so of not only focusing on the good things, but, looking at the things that are challenging also.
So I love the way you just described that. So thank you, because that exactly are the components of the transition, right? Like I said, we're talking about it in the sense of a move. Some moves can be really, really daunting and the reason why I have a lot of it. But you described, right, the end, then that middle where you thought you knew it, but you didn't. Then you're still getting lost. And then all of a sudden, yes, you're getting places without the GPS and you've adjusted and it feels like home. So those are the steps. What happens, and when I think people tend to reach out for the most help, is when they end up going through multiple transitions at once. And the program I got certified, they refer to that as like a lifequake, right? It's sort of the classic story of a person who gets divorced, starts a new career, moves, and maybe their kids leave for college, right? Where you have 3 or 4 things that happen and your life becomes unrecognizable to what it was before. And that level of disorientation, even if many of the things are positive, right? It's, in that scenario, depending on where the marriage was, the divorce can be positive or negative, but it's painful. And that's a huge transition. Moving may have been a new beginning. The job may have been a new beginning. You're happy, your kids, there's a lot of grief. Those are sort of called lifequakes. And when you have that many transitions, and I would say it's anything 3 or above to sort of put you in that lifequake where you really look around. I think coaching and particularly working with someone who's an expert in transitions can be so helpful because or you've got the ending and the grief cycle or the excitement. You've got all that messy middle. I mean, just your GPS description, so perfect. So I have to tell you, I also moved to Texas. I'm in Austin. And
close.
it is the hardest place to drive because the lefts don't work like any left I've ever been to. And I've lived in a lot of states. You are going all sorts of places when you think you're making a left. It's usually like a U-turn.
Yeah. I moved to Austin in 2016. I live in Round Rock now.
Okay.
So
just up the road.
Yeah. So we're not far. And, this lifequake idea is definitely something I want to lean in on because when we think of life, right? People think life happens to them. For example, my dog died or someone, in your family passes away, right? Is life is happening, right? And if we let it compound because we don't want to focus or if we don't want to heal, then that can be that lifequake happening, but it might not even happen all at once. It can happen gradually. Very similar to how you start a game of Jenga. Jenga is like the blocks and you pull out all the blocks.
No, I know it.
Typically, when you remove the first block, unless you're a jerk, the tower is not going to topple over. So sometimes, people will have a moment where there is that change, that transition, and they don't really pay much attention to it. And so eventually it compounds and it just becomes a burden or an anchor or, something to the point where they can't not pay attention anymore. So they have to be more careful. So when it gets to the end of the game of Jenga, now they have to be meticulous because they don't want everything to topple over, everything that they have been avoiding, all the missing pieces. Now they're more attentive. But if we wanted to avoid this from happening where we have all of these things just kind of building up, should we be looking at the individual pieces that are changing in our life before it gets too overbearing for us?
I mean, absolutely. The Jenga analogy is a great analogy. With any transition, in many cases, it's the ones that happen to us. About half of transitions happen to us and half we initiate. And, both can be fraught, but we can get stuck in a stage, in an ending stage where we're not dealing with the grief or anger or whatever happened. You can get stuck in it, right? It's very possible to stagnate because to get through a transition, you have some real work you need to do. Even just doing the moving analogy, you need to make some friends and some acquaintances, and that can be really difficult as adults. And how do you put yourself out there? And that does not necessarily happen overnight. And if you're not working on those pieces, to your point, then another piece happens, or you try and insert another piece and you don't have a foundation built, right? I mean, ideally what's happening is you're going through transitions is you are generating, if you will, good foundation or stronger rooms or well-built rooms, right? I'm not quite sure I'm going to make the building analogy, but you don't want to have your foundation eroded because those are, I mean, in a most dramatic sense, those are where people really have a massive breakdown because they haven't dealt with anything for a very long time. And we all need to. It's easier in many cases to ignore or stuff down, but at some point that work still has to get done. And I feel like the people who move through these stages in life, because we all face challenges, doing the work as it comes and trying to grow through the challenges versus sort of hiding for them or, hoping it'll be gone or it will disappear. It doesn't, you sort of have to at some point go through it.
What would it look like if a person fails to transition at the right time?
I think it's a person who starts to feel really stuck and closed down, people close to them. And we see characters like this in media who appear very shut in, and people are saying, they won't change, they're stuck. Their world gets, in many cases, smaller and smaller, and they can feel more and more isolated. And that's where you get, things can really snowball on you, can affect your health. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but those are the signs of a person who's just not working with the changes that are coming and trying to grow anew. It's sort of a cliche that any of my clients who think about retirement are aware of. But, there used to be this thing like, I don't want to retire and die because I don't do anything. There'd be these stories about someone who worked really hard and they'd think they were going to have all this time. And then it's that sort of stagnation where people can't envision what to do. And that messy middle is really long, where your previous identity is gone and you're having to figure out who you are not being a worker. And very similar to someone who's gone through, a major breakup, right? Either a separation or divorce. Who am I without this partner? Right? When kids leave the house, who am I when I'm not actively parenting, when my whole schedule is not driven by kid schedules, right? So those are those sort of moments where people look around and you have to make a choice of what behaviors you're going to put in and how you move forward. Because sometimes, right, we can make choices that aren't really great for us.
Very true. I also see people living in the past quite a bit, and in the same regard. We could think of the high school jock where he's so proud of himself. And if you look down, when he joins corporate America, maybe he gets a 9-to-5 job. It's almost like he doesn't even know who he is anymore because his identity was this all-star player that everyone loved. And now he's literally working in a cubicle. No one comes and talks to him or maybe even ask for help or guidance or whatever. It's almost like he's just by himself. So he went from being admired to just kind of being in a job, not even so much a career, because a career would typically give you more meaning and fulfillment. But, he has this mindset of I'm just in this job. And for, those type of individuals, they have a hard time transitioning to something better because they're still living in the past when they think about the golden age when things were good. Is there a way to get people to look at how the future can also be good too?
Yeah, it's interesting because what you've described is a person, and we all have this to some degree, who is getting their validation from external validation. And as we progress as humans, that has got to switch, because when all of your validation comes externally, that inevitably goes away. That's where I like to start doing the values work and the North Compass. So, you would go way back to during that period of the athlete, what were the sparks of joy? Was it purely the adulation, or was it excellence? Was it being part of a team, right? I think you could dig under some of those components because it becomes very easy. I mean, if it is doing things that people notice, there's ways to channel that, right? Now, I would channel that you don't want your self-worth to come from external validation, but if it is being in a public eye in a service profession, you could do that, and you could get recognition. You'd have to work on that. But many times there's other things that go under it, would have to do with competence, excellence, team, working together. And you could see how going to a cubicle and being an individual contributor, if you did that work of what are those things, would be extremely confusing. And that is part, I feel for people who it seems great to have excellence very early on. Right. And I think we can all look at them and be like, oh, that'd be so nice. I really actually feel for some of those people, because the hard work of people who struggle or feel like bullied or picked on going through school or have to figure out how to make friends or get great, that struggle, I think actually prepares you really well. You get that grit and that resilience and that inner fortitude. In many cases, people are working very, very hard who have a lot of natural talent, but they can get also pushed. I've met people who really didn't even want to do what they were doing, but society as a whole sees talent And very early on with children, we channel them different directions, like, oh, you like planes, you should be a pilot. I mean, that sort of making that up, but you think of how easy that is to do, and people get those messages, and there's even exploring where those messages come from. So there's a lot of pretty deep work when a person's identity goes away. And that's exactly what you've described, particularly if that identity felt like you, if you didn't feel like you had a separation from what I could do, in this case, on the field or in a stadium, whatever kind of sport, we're in Texas, so it's probably football, but it could be something else. We'll just go with that right now, versus who am I and what do I bring?
Yeah, very true. And I did write down the North Star, the North Compass, and values, because it is a crucial part for individuals to begin to get clear, as we said early on. And I know people don't do the value work, especially when it comes to their relationships, and they wonder why their relationship just kind of crumbles apart. But it's not only relationships, it's the whole aspect of your life, your career. You ask a kindergartner, what do you want to be? I want to be a doctor. I want to be a firefighter. And it's because, those are the blanket things that they're presented with, rather than doing the deep, meaningful work to say, okay, what do I want?
Yeah. It's one of the reasons I like the career coaching so much, because I am a believer that everything starts with values, and then what that value looks like to you, because it's so easy. And this is not society being bad or your family being bad, but we're shaped by our environment and our family. And if we don't get really clear about how we want to show up and what's meaningful to us, and sometimes people just say they don't know, which is, it's okay. You just have to take some time and do some exploration. You just sort of get bandied about, and you wake up one day, because I think we all have those moments where you realize you're doing something that doesn't feel true to you, or you don't even know who you are. That's one of the saddest things I hear people say sometimes when they go through it. It's not just that their life has changed, but that they're not really that sure what they stand for. And we'll do some work. Like if I say, what does respect look like to you, or integrity? You and I'll both hear that word, but it may look very different to each of us. Right? And based on our cultures, and it's not bad or good, but it's important that I'm able to articulate what acting with integrity or showing respect to someone looks like. And you do the same in a relationship, because if we're not really clear on how that shows up for each of us, we can keep missing. We can have two people trying to actually do an agreed upon thing, but in a way that doesn't resonate with the other.
Mm-hmm. I know we live in a world, if we had to just look at it as a blanket, where everyone's telling you what to do, what to be, how to be, etc. Because if you feel like you're an outcast, it's almost like you're on this desert island. We become like a social media app, the effect of what social media does to the mind is like, oh, no one's my friend. No one's following me. No one's liking my posts. And all of these things are literally going back to what you said early on, like the validation where we're seeking it. But if you can get to the point where you don't necessarily need the validation from someone else, you can say, okay, I did what I needed to do today. I went to the gym. I can give myself this positive, words of, you did a great job today. You lifted the weights, and if you didn't want to lift the weights, if you didn't want to go to the gym, or you ate healthy, there's so many things that we can do to help our mindset or our path in life to be more focused. And the value work, I think, is so important. And I just love to have coaches come on who help people with that foundational work, and then also the transitional work in all different aspects of their life. But as we begin to wrap up, I would love to get some final words from you, and then for you to tell the audience where they can find you.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the way you summarized it, because I think the final word is there's real power where we can get clear about what we want from our life versus what our family and community want. Even if we do what our family or community want, I think it's really powerful to understand if there are gaps, because then we're not just being bandied about, and we are making choices, right? There's real power in making a choice and being aware. So that's my final word, right? And that ties in with the values and everything else. Best way to get a hold of me is really my website at Susan-Hensley. self-sabotage.com. So it's easy, book and online trains. There's a little contact me button. You can email me. I email folks back. So
easy enough. And I'll definitely put the description or the website down below. If you have any socials, I'm going to add it also because I know people like socials. They like, oh, I got to send someone an Instagram message or I got to follow them, see what they're doing, because sometimes, people, need to be nurtured when it comes to change.
I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn as well.
Of course, I'm definitely going to put those because, change is very scary. And I understand when you're giving someone, an intimate part of yourself, the person you would like to be, it's scary because, like you might think, well, this person's going to judge me. This person's going to laugh at my dreams. And it's not so much that you have to have that fear when you're working with a coach, but it's just something that, you just kind of grow up into where your friends laugh at you if you have a crazy dream or a big dream. I can't tell you how many times in middle school when I was teaching middle school, people will laugh at someone's dream. And it could be that anchor that stops you from asking for help when there's someone who will truly help you excel, just like Susan would. So get clear and look for that real power that you can have and that you can show to the world. And so I do want to thank you, Susan, for coming on, spending some time, and also talking about your work today.
Thank you. It's been terrific. I appreciate it. Thanks.